It's no wonder that meat has been a staple to the American diet for hundreds of years. It's tasty, packed with protein, and is often the center for any cookout celebration. So, since we have such a strong relationship with meat, isn't it in our best interest to know just where it comes from, how it's prepared, and how it may be affecting our bodies and environment? True, some of this information may be hard to stomach, but it is important to be reminded about how unethical practices in the meat industry can have very real consequences for us all. Let us begin with how globally reaching the meat industry truly is. Meat production is an industry giant, generating approximately $714 billion a year globally as of 2017. According to a study conducted by Zion Market Research, this number is growing by a compounded rate of 14% a year, resulting in a projected worth of nearly $1,567 billion by 2020. That's a lot of meat, but how that meat is being treated should be a concern for all, more than just the companies that are able to profit from it. This brings us to the ethical issues surrounding the meat industry. We will take you through each aspect of the meat industry and show you the ethical issues they pose. First, we will be dealing with the conditions of the animals and their caregivers, and what they are subjected to at the factory farms. Next, we will talk about what you might be exposed to through the meat products that you ingest, and how that can have an adverse effect on consumer health. Lastly, we will discuss the sustainability within the meat industry and how uninhibited growth may be affecting the environment.
Although animals have been determined to not possess moral standing because of their inability to reason, humans still have a moral obligation to not be needlessly cruel to their animals' counterparts. It is clear that animals can feel pain, and we should do everything in our capacity to reduce that while still retaining the benefit of the products they provide. However, the conditions that animals are subjected to in factory farms are needlessly cruel. Chickens, for example, are either piled into massive sheds that have no access to sunlight or are restricted to tiny coops without room to stretch their wings or rock around. They are forced to endure filthy conditions where they must stand in their own excrement for days at a time. Due to the restriction of space, chickens will become easily agitated and actually attempt to peck one another to death, causing chicken producers to preemptively remove their talons and beaks by sawing them off. Between the maiming and filth, chickens are then administered antibiotics in order to endure the horrible living conditions, which usually results in death. Similarly, pigs and cows are subjected to restrictive environments as well. Female pigs are confined to gestation crates where they are forced to birth litter after litter without the ability to move or even turn around. Dairy cows also must endure small pens and daily milkings, making them restless and sore. Over 15% of dairy cows develop lameness due to this, which can be very painful and many result in death. Even larger percent develop manitis, which is an infection of the mammary gland caused by milking machines, which is also extremely deadly. Along with confinement, animals at factories farms have received mistreatment at the hands of other crate takers. PETA has documented factory workers being told to rip off chicken heads while they are still alive and be needlessly abusive to birds while preparing them for slaughter. When pigs and cows due for castration, the majority are not administered painkillers, causing them needless suffering. It is commonplace to render an animal unconscious prior to slaughtering, either by asphyxiation or administering an electrical current. But many times this method is ineffective and animals can bleed out or scarred alive while still being aware of what is happening to them.
There's been a call to action from animal rights activists and consumers to rectify the living conditions of animals on factory farms. Companies such as Purdue Farms and Wayne Farms, two major poultry producers, have adjusted their business model to make sure their chickens have less crowded and more enriched environments. However, one of the biggest meat producers, Tyson Foods, has yet to address issues relating to animal confinement and welfare. Continuing to allow gestation crates for sows and enclosed cages for hens lessens consumers' trust in Tyson and, in fact, has affected their bottom line. Many customers and other major corporations that buy wholesale are finding more ethical choices and so Tyson might be forced to undergo these changes in order to keep up with consumers' demands.
The unethical treatment of animals is obviously a major concern in the meat industry, but also is the unethical treatment of meat factory workers. In most instances, the conditions the worker is in is also as bad as the animals. In a study conducted during 2016, OSHA reported that over 17,000 meat processing workers sustained severe injuries while conducting their duties. It was then reported by the Bureau of Labor Statistics that poultry workers are 1.6 times more likely to sustain a work-related injury than the national average, and meat processing workers are twice as likely. In addition to injuries, workers often have to endure long shifts without taking any breaks, and many resort to wearing diapers. There is also a rampant issue in the hiring of undocumented workers who are exploited because they are paid well below the minimum wage. Case Farms is such a company that has frequently violated federal workplace safety standards, which has resulted in legal prosecution. For over 25 years, Case Farms has knowingly hired undocumented workers. In order to avoid detection, they have falsified paperwork in the past. They have also unfairly fired workers for protesting against poor working conditions. Employers have been penalized for hiring illegal immigrants by being levied fines and facing jail time, and these personal consequences should be enough to initiate much needed change.
Since we have covered the living conditions for the animals and the factory conditions for the workers, we can now move on to yet another aspect that unethical behaviors in the meat industry affect us. Unfortunately, the unsanitary conditions of factory farms inevitably harm the consumer because animals have to be administered antibiotics just to survive, which we then are exposed to through their meat. It's not that the antibiotics in themselves are harmful, but superbugs or antibiotic-resistant bacteria can develop and reside in the meat which we then consume. Americans incur 2 million antibiotic-resistant infections a year because of those foodborne pathogens. 23,000 deaths occur out of those that were infected. By reducing the use of antibiotics to just the animals that need it, companies can help reduce those statistics.
During our research, a question that was posed is if all growth is necessarily a good thing. The meat industry has had unprecedented growth, nearly quadrupling in output over the last 50 years, while the world's population has only grown about 41%. We're eating more meat than ever before, but how much is too much? Now over 80% of all agricultural land is devoted to livestock production. A disproportionate amount of that land is devoted solely to cows, who occupy 11.6 million square miles compared to the combined 1.5 million square miles of chicken and pigs. Reducing red meat in our diets might be a good alternative so that land can be reclaimed for other agricultural purposes. In addition to livestock requiring so much space, they require a lot of water too. About a third of the world's fresh water is used to sustain the meat industry. In the US, that number jumps up to 50 to 60%. Reducing the global herd is the most effective measure of supporting water conservation efforts worldwide.
Questions of sustainability lead directly into our next topic, which is environmental impact. Because the meat industry is so large, it does have a direct effect on greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, over 18% of greenhouse gas emissions are attributed directly to animal agriculture. And in the US alone, 7 million pounds of excrement are produced every minute by livestock. That nitrous oxide emitting from the excrement directly contributes to global warming. If this animal waste is not properly regulated, it does contaminate the groundwater as well. Another way the environment is negatively affected by animal agriculture is through deforestation. Unfortunately, a lot of our deforestation is attributed directly to animal agriculture. In fact, 91% of rainforest destruction is used to cultivate agricultural land for the purpose of animal agriculture. Carbon emissions also increase due to this. And global weather patterns are directly influenced by rainforest systems, so having them destroyed means that those patterns are directly affected as well. The company Cargill is one of the largest meat providers, but also one of the leading contributors of Amazon deforestation. Between the period of 2011 and 2015, they deforested nearly 300. The company Cargill is one of the largest meat providers, but is also one of the leading contributors to Amazon deforestation. Between the period of 2011 and 2015, they deforested nearly 321,000 acres of rainforests in Brazil. Cargill has previously signed an agreement saying that it would eliminate deforestation from its production of beef products by 2020, but it has in fact increased this. There has been a public outcry, though, against Cargill, which has spurred them to reaffirm their promise. They now claim that by 2030, they will essentially eliminate all deforestation from their supply chain, not just for beef products. This is one of the instances where social pressure has actually made a company do something for the better.
The alternatives for ethical companies, they should treat the animals with care and have them live a life of freedom so that they naturally interact with other species. They should provide a clean and well-kept environment and not have them feel as tools to gain a knowledge for human treatment. For alternatives for consumers, research labels and research companies and view the conditions that they use to develop these products for marketing. Some rather go vegetarian or vegan, which not only helps the animals, but it also helps our environment as well. Moving forward, we should take in consideration for these animals, and the treatment that they go on a day-to-day basis is not okay. A quote written by Richard Ryder once said, "Because one species is more clever than another, does it give it a right to imprison or torture the less clever species? Does one exceptional clever individual have a right to exploit the less clever individuals of his own species? To say that he does is to say with the facets that the strong have a right to abuse and exploit the weak. Might is right, and the strong and ruthless shall inherit the earth."